to the PSAT webinar. This is the new PSAT, supplemental info to transition into the 2016 SAT. I'm Michelle Colling with Test Prep Seminars, and we'll be spending a few hours today going through all that you need to know in regards to the new formatted PSAT that you'll be taking in October. Hopefully, you have a few tools with you today. You have a follow-along script that matches our PowerPoint. However, your script has a few blanks in it. You'll have to stay engaged with me in order to fill in your blanks. You also have a few practice quizzes as well, and the answer key for those practice quizzes are in fact in the back under Answer Sheet. Anytime you finish a test prior to time, you're welcome to go ahead and score your test while you're waiting for the test to complete. We will give you time at the end of each test to mark your scores. The other thing is you may or may not have a calculator today. We are actually taking a math test today that you will need a calculator. However, I'm sure you have a cell phone pretty close by. You're welcome to use your cell phone calculator for the math test today. However, I do ask that you put your cell phone on silent and you let it go dark except for the math test. So what are the hours that we're going to be spending today look like? Well, we're going to go through all three sections of the PSAT. Each one of those sections comes with its own score. We'll discuss those scores in the beginning, and then we'll get in depth of each one of those sections and the strategies and tips that will help you manage those sections and perform well on the SAT or the PSAT. Going forward through the rest of the day, you will be receiving tips and strategies that will help you do your personal best on this test. But you can't get there without preparation and practice. Those are the key elements to success. So we're in preparation mode now, and we're going to go into practice mode with the test, and we hope that you go forward in practice mode after our webinar today. Let's look at these different tests. Going forward, we used to have just one PSAT, and regardless of what age or grade level you were in, that's the PSAT that you took. With the new format, there are actually three different platforms of PSAT. We have what we call the PSAT NMSQT, our National Merit Scholar Qualifying Test. That's designed specifically for 11th graders and is used for the National Merit Scholarship Program explicitly. Then we have a PSA-10. That is designed for 10th graders looking to potentially qualify for National Merit next year and for them to have a roadmap and what they need to be working on to accomplish that in the following year. PSAT 8 and 9 is designed as a benchmark for 8th or 9th graders to see where they need to move forward in their studies to successfully achieve an SAT score they need to get into the college of their choice. That is different, but it's also highly beneficial to anyone taking the PSAT. However, anything that we talk about today for testing and strategies, time management, works across all three platforms. So let's look at what compromises the new PSAT. We'll talk about reading first. That's the first section that you will see in testing. Reading is 60 minutes. It has 47 questions. 4 passages that we consider what are long passages and one that we refer to as a paired passage. Each one of those passages has 70 to 100 lines, and they have 9 to 10 questions per passage. Your sources for these passages will be literature. You'll have 2 from history or social studies and 2 from science. The next section will be grammar. Grammar is 35 minutes in length. It's 44 questions. It's 4 passages consisting of 11 questions per passage. Each passage and reading gives you about 8 minutes and 45 seconds to complete within the 35 minutes. Now you can take longer on one passage and shorter on another passage, but if you just broke it out into 4, it gives you about 8 minutes and 45 seconds. The sources for these passages will be career, history and social studies, humanities, and science. You have 2 math sections on the PSAT and the SAT going forward. You have Math Section 3, which is a non-calculator section. It's 25 minutes for a total of 17 questions. 13 of your questions are multiple choice, and 4 are what we refer to as free response. Those used to be called grid-ins. Simply said, they don't give you answer selections. You have to create your own answer. You have about 1 minute and 28 seconds per question to finish those based on that 25-minute testing time. We have Math with Calculator, which is Section 4. That's 45 minutes total, 31 questions, 27 are multiple choice, and 4 free response. The math that you will see is broken down like this. 33% of it will be algebra, 29% of that will be problem solving and data analysis, 28% advanced math, and 10% additional math, geometry, and trig. Of course, you have that sheet in front of you, and so you may want to go ahead and just circle those times so that you are aware of how much time you have anytime you're taking a practice test. And you probably will get a little bit tired of hearing me say, prepare, practice, succeed today. But it really is the motto that you need to follow to do your personal best on the PSAT and the SAT. So we know what the sections are, we know how long they are, and we know how many questions are in each section. You're going to receive a different scoring system for the PSAT than you've seen in the past. Reading and writing are a combined score. They range from 160 to 760 maximum points. The math section, both 3 and 4, calculator and non-calculator, are second score. Again, that score ranges 160 to 760 total points, for a total PSAT score between 320 and 1520. The unique thing about the new PSAT is it is only 40 points under an SAT scale. So if you were to receive a 320 on that PSAT, you could add plus 40 and know that your SAT would have been somewhere around 360. There's no longer a perfect score on a PSAT as well. 1520 is your maximum point total, but it doesn't correlate to a perfect score. You'll also have a secondary set of test scores for reading, writing, and math, and they range between 8 and 38. You'll receive some cross-test scores, and those are history, social studies, and science. While the PSAT and the SAT don't have history and science sections, you will receive a cross-test score because there are questions that are embedded within the test now that will help them determine your college readiness indicator for history and science within the PSAT sections that you see. Our next slide is PSAT sub-scores. Now, this slide is kind of busy, and this is also new to the PSAT sub-scores. The reason that I say that it's kind of busy is there's a lot of writing here. And to be succinct, you're going to have a scaled score of 1 to 15 on 7 categories within the PSAT sections: reading, writing and language, and math. You'll have a command of evidence score, a words and context score, expression of ideas, standard English conventions, heart of algebra, problem solving and data analysis, and passport to advanced math. These scores just give you an indication of how well within the reading section regarding these particular topics you are doing as a college readiness indicator. Keep in mind though that reading and writing and language is one combined score, and the math is the other half of that PSAT score. It's really all you need to know about sub-scores right now. You'll receive a complete informational sheet on how to utilize those scores when you receive your final PSAT information. This information is really good for you though, because it'll be a great indicator of where you need to spend your time moving forward to either improve your score or get your score to the level that you need it to be going forward into the SAT. So we've talked a lot about scores, we've talked about what exactly is going to be on the PSAT, but we haven't talked about how to take the PSAT. Well, here are 2 general test taking strategies that will work across the board of PSAT and SAT, and one of them even works on any test you take going forward in your academic career. This first strategy is pretty specific to PSAT and SAT now, and that is this. In the past, you were docked a quarter of a point every time you answered incorrectly on a PSAT or an SAT. On the new format, there's no guessing penalty. So don't leave any answer choices blank. You want to answer every question on the test. Even if you don't have a clue as to what the question is, you still want to color in a bubble. Chances are a few guesses could give you another point. You won't guess everyone right, but you will guess some correctly. We'll also talk about how to be more educated in your guessing, and that's our second strategy, which is eliminating bad answers. So there are many times when we've looked at a test and we don't have a clue of what the question is or what the answer is for the question, but we do recognize that a few of the answer choices are not in fact the answer. So what we want to do is we want to cross those out. Now you may be doing that already, but if you're not, we actually really want you to physically cross out the letter and the first few words of the answer choice that we're not going to select. That sounds like a time waster, when in fact it is a time saver. What happens is this. You see that answer and you know that's not in fact the correct answer. But if you only exit out or you don't make any mark on it, your eyes continue to see it, which means your brain continues to process it. If you just put an X out to the side of it, your eyes still don't really recognize that we are no longer considering that answer. Therefore, your brain is still processing that answer option. But if you will physically draw the line through it, it lets your eyes know to tell your brain that it doesn't have to think about that particular question or answer selection anymore. Everybody with me on that? Okay. Some of y'all are already starting to nod off on me. Okay, let's go. Sit up straight. Let's take a deep breath in. Exhale. One more time. And exhale. I know it's really easy. You've gotten kind of comfortable. It's probably not exactly bright in here, and it's really easy to doze off. Your challenge today is to be awake and engaged. Perseverance is a key indicator of success in college. You want to persevere through this webinar with me today. You want to stay awake and focused. Help your neighbor out. If you see your neighbor starting to doze off, give him a gentle nudge. Don't give him a bruise, but just give him a gentle nudge. And we're going to jump into evidence-based reading. Now again, in your information, some of these strategies are missing key elements of the strategy. You need to write those in as you see them on the screen. So evidence-based reading, what is that? In the past, it was just called reading. Now it's called evidence-based reading. Well, the first thing is, what they're saying here is there is actually evidence that you will have to find within the reading passage in order to answer the questions. The other thing you need to worry about with evidence-based reading, or not worry about so much, but you need to be aware of, is your attitude going into the evidence-based reading. Attitude for reading is everything. We say attitude is everything, fake it till you ace it. And what we mean by that is this. This is not going to be fascinating, interesting, engaging reading. This is going to be dry and possibly make your eyes feel like they need to roll back into your head because there's not a lot of interest in what you're reading. And how many times have you been reading something and 10 minutes in you're like, I don't even know what I just read? Well, we can't afford to do that on a timed PSAT. So you have to walk into the reading knowing that this is going to be the best, most fascinating, engaged read you have ever had in your life, okay? For that 60 minutes, you are locked in on reading. And once you establish that attitude, you will have a much better evidence-based reading score than if you walk in and like, ugh, this is going to be horribly painful. I just can't wait for it to be over. I wish I never had to do this. And let's face it, none of us are super excited about having to do a PSAT. I'm sure you weren't like, woohoo, I get to spend my time watching some woman talk about PSAT today. But it is, in fact, an element to success. So let's make the best of it and get the best score you can. So my little friend Sherlock Holmes over here. I'm sure all of y'all are familiar with Sherlock Holmes. Your Sherlock Holmes may be a little more current than mine is. But in the end, they still do the same thing. They're looking for evidence. They're an investigator and they're looking for evidence. Well, that's what you in fact are doing as you're doing evidence-based reading for the PSAT. I just told you it is 60 minutes of exciting reading, 5 passages. 1 passage will be from U.S. and world literature. It's a total of 9 questions. History and social studies will be 2 passages, each of those passages 9 to 10 questions each. We also have 2 science passages, again, they're 9 to 10 questions each. Of the 2 history, social studies, and science passages, I know that sounds like 6, but it really is only 4. One of those 4 passages will be what we refer to as that paired passage. And what that means is there's a passage 1 and a passage 2 within the passage, so to speak, and you'll cross-reference those 2 to answer some questions. It's a total of 47 questions over 60 minutes. It doesn't sound bad, but you have to read and answer the questions in those 47 minutes. It's doable, especially when you know the strategies to do it within that time. So let's look at the types of questions that you're going to see on reading. Now, I think we've all established that if you're sitting here ready to take a PSAT, you are in fact more than capable of reading these slides on your own. So I am not going to read these word for word. But what I do want to point out is here, you want to go ahead and tick off anything that you're not completely familiar with or have a complete understanding of. Because it's very beneficial when you know how you're being tested to study for that. And this is, in fact, how you're going to be tested. These are the types of questions that you'll see in the test. So let's look at analyzing quantitative information really quickly. Quantitative means that it is in fact measurable with a number. So that's what you want to keep in mind for that quantitative. You're used to reading closely, determining explicit meaning, don't play in the street, versus implicit meaning, stay away from traffic. And all of those things I'm sure you're somewhat familiar with, but if you're not comfortably familiar with them, then you want to go and spend a little bit of time familiarizing yourself with these so that when you are tested on them, you know what you're being tested on. So, next slide. Key differences in new and old PSAT reading. So, your former PSAT was more definition-oriented for words, kind of like New York Times crossword puzzle sort of words that you never used. And going forward, it's going to be more words in context versus definitions. There is more of an emphasis on the evidence instead of the critical reasoning skill that you used to use in former PSAT, and SAT for that matter. Now there is this thing called inclusion of informational graphics. Does that sound exciting? It's not really exciting, but what it means is you will actually have graphics that are embedded within your writing and language and your reading sections. Those graphics are put in there so that they can ascertain that cross-test score for science and history. And then you also have a larger range of text complexity. So a few different things. Overall, it's kind of the same, just a few different emphasis. So let's look at this slide. As you can see, you have a color change here. And this is probably one of those slides that you have a significant blank in. These are our strategy slides. These are the slides that are really going to help you manage the test. So our first strategy is scan questions for line references and mark them in the passage with a single line, but not brackets. And we'll talk about why not brackets a little bit later on when we get to the importance of brackets. So what we're telling you is that when you're reading, you will have questions that actually have line references that take you to a particular place in the passage. And we want you to go ahead and find those questions with line references and mark the line references in the passage associated with the question. That's going to help you to read and answer simultaneously. The questions are always in order of the passage. So I'm going to say that again a little more explicitly. We don't want you to read the passage, answer the questions. We don't want you to read the questions, read the passage. We want you to do them at the same time. So read a couple of paragraphs, answer a couple of questions. You always want to read the conclusion at the very beginning though, so you have an overall feel for the tone of the paragraph, or the passage, I should say. So I just said that again. Read a couple of paragraphs in the last few sentences, and then answer as many questions as you can. Go on and read a little bit more, answer a few more questions, and just keep doing that until you've answered all the questions for the passage and move on to the next passage. So this is what it looks like. So we have our reading section on one side and our questions on the other side. And as you can see, this particular question does in fact have line references of 69 to 73. So we just drew a little line over there to indicate those line references, and then we looked at all of our other questions to see if they in fact had line references, and we'd go ahead and mark any other line references that were noted before we started answering our questions. Pretty self-explanatory. All right, so paired questions. So some questions on the new PSAT and SAT are followed by a question. Which choice provides evidence for the previous question? There's that evidence word again. So first of all, you want to scan ahead and see if you have any of these questions related to the passage that you're working on. And then you want to use line references to help you know where to look for the answer. Now these are going to be a little more marked than just the typical line reference. And then you're going to answer both questions simultaneously. I'm going to show you an example of what we're talking about on this next slide. But what we really want you to do when you find a question that's specific to that and it's answering a question for another question, you actually want to do the question and the answer selection letter with it. So it's going to look like this. So question 4 is just a straight question, but question 5 is the question about the question, so to speak. So we have those line references, and we've marked it 5A, 5B, 5C, and 5D. And again, you want to look ahead to see if you have any of these paired questions associated with your passage. And if you do, then you want to go ahead and do this before you really start answering your questions. So let's look at this strategy. This is a great strategy. This might even be a retweet opportunity because I know y'all have your phones. I have a 16-year-old too. You're never far from your phones. So feel free to share this tip. It's a good one. You want to avoid answer choices that are extreme. Now, there may be the rare occasion where you come across an extreme passage in a PSAT or an SAT, but for the most part, they're pretty moderate in tone. So you want to stay away from anything that kind of ends in an EST. Let's look at our examples right here. Egyptians used the most gold of any civilization in history. Can we really prove that? That's kind of a thought, but not necessarily anything that we could find hard evidence to support. So we want to stay away from EST, and we want to stay away from words that are like absolute in their nature. Most, least, never, always. Let's look at the next one. Genghis Khan was the cruelest ruler of all time. Well, I may in fact believe that Genghis Khan was the cruelest ruler of all time. You, however, may think that your third grade teacher was the cruelest ruler of all time. So it's extreme in its statement, and we want to avoid those types of answers. The other thing is we want to avoid answers that involve money. Unless our passage that we're reading about has something to do with money, our answers won't involve money. So you want to stay away from answer choices that have expensive or monetary values associated with them. You want to stay away from answer choices that are your opinion. Remember, this is evidence-based reading. The other thing is we want to stay away from comparison answers unless we're in that double passage or the author has actually compared something within the passage. So you're looking for those keywords of more or less or fewer or greater within the answers, and those can help you eliminate some answers. I'm going to go back to that slide really quickly just to make sure everybody got those filled in their blanks. I know, I can go kind of fast sometimes. All right, let's go on to our next strategy. So, when to guess. The great news is you can guess now without a penalty, and that is fabulous. But you need to know how to guess to make it work to your best advantage. So first of all, we're in evidence-based reading. So the reality is the evidence for all of the answers are in fact in the passage. However, if this was easy, you wouldn't be spending a few hours with me. Sometimes it's not exactly Captain Obvious to the rescue. So what we need to do is we need to match the tone of the passage with our answer choice. And if we're still not sure of what our answer choice should be, then we always want to keep in mind that SAT and PSAT are always politically correct for the most part, and it will often be very moderate in tone. So if we're still trying to decide between two potential answer selections, then always go ahead if you're unsure and go with the more moderate of the two, more moderately toned of the two answer choices. Just a little way to kind of up your score, so to speak, with the guessing option. So we talked about those graphics that are being inserted into the test in different places to help give you those cross-section scores for college indicators on history and science. That's what this is going to look like, your reading graphics. You'll have 2 questions per graphic, and it can be a general or it can be a specific question to the graphic itself. The other thing that you have to keep in mind is if the graphic shows up in reading, or if the graph really shows up in reading, then you have to really pay attention to what you're reading and to the graph, because some answer choices will be accurate according to the graph on its own, but not responsive to the question in association with the passage reading. So they have to be, in fact, true for both sides. And it looks like this. It's not anything fancy or special. You just have a part of the passage right here. Then you have the questions associated that you need to use the graph and the passage to answer. Everybody good there? I know, it's really exciting, isn't it? Okay, let's look at strategy paired passage. So paired passage is that last passage that it's 2 passages in one section, so to speak. So here's how you approach a paired passage. You want to read the introduction. Oop, my text isn't coming out. You want to read the introduction, material for perspective. You want to scan your questions for line references. You want to mark those in both passages and make them a little bit different so you can recognize the difference. Then read passage 1 and answer questions from passage 1. Read passage 2, answer questions from passage 2. What's left over will be comparison passages comparison questions between the two passages. So much like how do you eat an elephant, one bite at a time, in case you didn't know, that's how you tackle a paired passage, one passage at a time. So we've tackled pair passages, we've tackled line references, we've tackled evidence in and of itself, and we've tackled how to utilize the chart within reading. So let's tackle a practice test. We're going to do a practice reading passage. It's 13 minutes in length. It's your reading passage 1 quiz, so everybody go ahead and find reading passage 1. Great. Now remember, if you finish before the end of the 13 minutes, quietly go ahead and check your scores, but the people around you may still be working, so please be respectful of their time. And if you find that you need to leave the area for any reason, you're welcome to do that, but you want to make sure that you do that in a non-disruptive manner. All right, everybody there? On your mark, get set, begin. Okay, time's up, pencils down. What'd you think? I don't see anybody that is bleeding. I didn't hear any screams of pain. Well, of course I didn't because I can't really see or hear you. But overall, I've never had anybody run from a room because of a reading test. But what did you think? The main thing is to give you a feel for what that test looks like and how you can utilize those strategies to manage it. If you didn't have time to score it, go ahead and do that now. I'll give you about 1.5 minutes to do that. And as you're scoring, just so you know, I'm not going to keep you captive for the whole time to get through this. We are going to build a few breaks in. And so if you are finished scoring, if you want to go ahead and stand up and kind of move around and get the blood flowing again, you might want to massage your brain just a little bit. It's thinking hard today. It's not used to having to think hard about new stuff quite at this pace. Shrug your shoulders, wiggle your toes, shake your hands out. The other thing that I'm going to share with you is this. If you find yourself losing focus and you need to bring your focus back in for a test, obviously you can't get up and move around, but what you can do, just kind of put your pencils down, put your hands flat, your palms flat on your desk, and take a few really deep breaths in through your nose and exhale through your mouth. 3 or 4 of those will really help to bring your focus back in. The other thing that you could do is you can take these 3 fingers right here, just kind of gently tap the back of your neck, and it sort of stimulates your brainstem a little bit, and it helps you bring focus back in. So those are a few little tips that you can use on actual test day when you're kind of contained in a little area and you can't move a lot to help you bring focus back in. All right, we've done reading, we've kind of moved around, we've gotten the blood flowing again. If you're still standing, then go ahead and have a seat. Find that comfortable spot. Not so comfortable you're dozing off on me. I need you, all eyes on me. A little needy about that today. It's hard to follow along if you're sleeping. There has not, in fact, ever been a reported case of sleep writing. And one of y'all, yeah, you might need to wipe that drool off right there. There you go. Okay. Y'all with me? All right, let's move into writing and language. This is the second section of the PSAT. And remember that writing and language and reading are one combined score. So you have 2 total scores that come into one final score, and your first total score is that reading and writing and language combined score. Everybody good? All right, we found writing and language. Okay, so writing and language for the PSAT. So it looks somewhat like the reading did, where you have a passage on the left and the corresponding possible correction on the right. Now the difference between the reading and the writing and language is this. In the reading, you were reading for evidence and then you were answering questions. In writing, you're actually looking at an underlined section within the passage and answering something specific to that underlined section. And sometimes it can be improved on, and sometimes it is in fact the way it should be within the passage itself. The writing and language is only 35 minutes in duration. Woohoo! That's so much better than 60, right? And then we have 4 passages, and those sources for the 4 passages will be careers, history, social studies, humanities, and science. Each passage has 11 questions associated with it for a total of 44 questions. You will again have at least 1 graphic associated in one passage, and you have roughly 8 minutes and 45 seconds to read and answer the questions for each one of the passages in that 35 minutes. Some will go a little faster, some will go a little slower, but on average, that's what time you have to spend. So if you're trying to manage your time, you need to be very aware of that 8-minute marker. So here's a sample of what the writing section looks like, and as you can see, we have that underlined portion within the passage, and then the 2 questions on the opposite side are associated specific to the underlined portions. So what is the content of the writing and language test? Well, you're going to see expression of ideas, development, organization, effective language use. Are you precise? Is it concise? Is it the right syntax? What about style and tone? So they're looking for that. Standard English conventions, sentence structure. Does it have a subject? Does it have a verb? Those types of things. Does it have a subject? Does it have a verb? Does it have a noun? Does it have a verb? Does it have a subject? Does it have a predicate? All right? Is your usage correct? Or is their usage correct, and do you recognize if it's correct or incorrect? And then also punctuation. Is it punctuated correctly? Should it have had punctuation? Does it have punctuation it shouldn't have? So those are all of the things that they are looking at. So here's a green slide, our strategy slide. First strategy for writing in language. Read each question before the corresponding part of the passage. What this does is it lets you know what you need to consider while you're reading, and it saves you reread time. So you don't want to read and then look at the question. You want to look at the question and then read. The other thing is you do not want to avoid the no change option. So A is always going to be identical to the way it was done in the passage. All right? You don't want to read the whole passage and then try to answer. You want to go ahead and answer questions as you proceed reading through the passage. So you want to read the question first and then read the area of the passage that's indicated. So it's going to look like this again. And what I want you to look at in this passage, let's read it really quick. My friend Johnny had been working as a mechanical forensic engineer for more than 30 years. After working as a college intern for an aerospace company, he was recruited by an established firm that specialized in forensic work. The chance to be involved in the inventions of varied types of, and it ends right there. I put an emphasis on a couple of words in there because notice that what we have underlined is had been working. And it doesn't sound horrible, does it? But it is not parallel because we were specialized and we were recruited. So we needed to has worked. Our answer choice C is what we would have selected over here. So it should read, my friend Johnny has worked as a mechanical forensic engineer, so that it stays parallel with the rest of the passage. So those are the things that they're looking for. That's how they're going to be testing you. So lots of things to pay attention to. Second strategy, consider the underlying portion as simply one possible correction of the 4 options. So I am incredibly guilty of this. Any of y'all have the SAT Question of the Day app on your phone? I have it. I do it every day. I love to do the writing part of it, but if I'm going to miss that, it's because the way it's written is in fact correct, and I keep trying to find the better way to do it, and there's not a better way to do it. And what you have to be really careful of here is it may sound better, but it's not punctuated correctly. So 1/4 of the time, answer selection A will in fact be the correct answer selection. So don't always assume that they've written it incorrectly, because in fact, 25% of the time, they've put it in the passage exactly as it should be. So we talked about what the content of writing in language will consist of. What are the testing items going to be? How are they going to test you on that content? They're going to have you looking at sentence structure. Can you identify a fragment? Can you? How often do we text in full sentences? And I can't tell you how many times my children have ridiculed me because I actually punctuated a complete sentence in my text, and they're like, why did you do that? So my challenge to y'all is this. We speak in text in Twitter every day. Some of y'all are doing that right now, I know. We speak in text in Twitter every day, and those are very fragmented in nature. So we need to really pay attention and recognize when something is a fragment and when something is in fact a complete sentence or when something is a run-on. Parallel structure, we just talked about in that example before. While it didn't sound horrible, it wasn't correct because it wasn't parallel in its structure. Verb tense is something that sometimes we really struggle with. Those can be kind of geographical in nature. Sometimes some areas we use a tense incorrectly, but it's done so frequently that we don't recognize that it's incorrect. So it's just a matter of spending some time back in your grammar tips and tricks and reacquainting yourself with some of this stuff. Conventions of usage. Do you have a pronoun agreement? Do you recognize pronoun agreement? Or do you recognize pronoun disagreement? Possessive determiners, subject-verb agreement, frequently confused words. We have a whole big slide regarding frequently confused words a couple of slides from now. Logical comparisons, and then conventional expressions. Now this is a tough one. Nike has us saying something that is incorrect, but we do it all the time. What is Nike's slogan? Just do it. Oops. It really should be just do so. Now, if you received any type of email or text where someone said, "I shall do so," you'd be like, okay, what play are you practicing for? But that is in fact the correct way to make that statement. We don't do it, but we in fact do it all the time. So while we don't need to change how we say it on a day-to-day basis, we do need to recognize that how we use it on a day-to-day basis is not correct. So a little challenge there. And it's funny, as you study this stuff, you start finding yourself going, oh, I can't say it that way. And all of a sudden you don't know what to say because you're so used to saying it one way, but you recognize it's not in fact right. All right, punctuation. End of sentence punctuation. Did you put a period on the end of your sentence? Did you capitalize that first letter in the sentence when you put that period on the end of your sentence? Great job. Within sentence punctuation, this one a little more tricky, not quite as straightforward sometimes. It's just end of sentence punctuation. Ever gotten one of those texts where the people have exclamation points all the time and you're like, why are they yelling at me? And they just turned something on or forgot to turn something off? Yeah, that's always fun, right? And then possessive nouns and pronouns. Items in a series like a list or the flag is red, white, and blue. How do you actually punctuate that? Non-restrictive clauses and unnecessary punctuation. That's another one that they will try to trip you up on. They might put some punctuation in there that doesn't need to be there. Let's look at an example of punctuation right here. So again, we have this field of engineering, and it's forensic engineering. And we're looking at the underlined section that's talking about vehicles. And it says vehicles vehicles working to extract natural resources for fuel. It's a little wordy for me, and so if I go over to my answer selections, I'm like, oh, it's C. C reads so much better. But it can't be C. Why can't it be C? I hear you answering me. Why can't it be C? Because the punctuation isn't correct. It does read better for sure, but we can't select C because it's punctuated incorrectly. So those are the things that they're going to try and trip you up on. They're wanting to see if you recognize, well, the flow is better, the punctuation is in fact incorrect. All right, more testing items. Development. All right, can you create or recognize the proposition? Can you recognize the support, the focus, and the quantitative information in the development? Organization. Is it logical in its sequence? Does it have an introduction, a conclusion? Are the transitions fluid? Effective use of language. Again, we just talked about all of that. Concise is really important. They don't want you to use 15 words when you could have said the same thing with 7. So they're really looking at those types of things. And we'll actually have a strategy very specific to being concise and using as few words as possible in a few more slides. So we're coming up on brackets. Now I have to tell you, this is another retweet moment. So everybody can take their phones out and tweet this out to all of their friends. This is huge. Might be one of my most favorite tips that we give. So if you see brackets for writing, and what I mean by brackets is there's a little number above or beside the paragraph, and the number is sitting in brackets. That is a big tip to you that you want to go and look at. Texas comes out again. You want to go and look at the questions to see if you have a question, and chances are really good it's going to be the last question associated with that passage that's kind of grayscaled out. What that question is going to ask you to do is it's going to ask you to either reorder or insert something into the passage. And if you know about that before you start to read the passage, you've saved yourself a lot of time and frustration, because it would be incredibly irritating to me and probably to any of y'all to have read everything, then answering everything just like this and get to that one and go, oh, are you kidding me? I have to go back and read that again because it was oh so fascinating the first time, right? So this is your indicator. Hey, I need to find that question. I see my brackets. I need to find that question and see what that question is going to ask me to do before I start reading. This is what it will look like. Notice that we have the little 1, the 2, the 3, the 4, and the 5, and they're all in brackets. That's your indicator to go through the questions and find that grayscaled question. 90% of the time or more, it's going to be the last question associated with the passage. Great, great, great tip. I'll let y'all finish tweeting about it. All right, run-on and fragment strategy. This slide, we're going to stay on the slide for a little bit because there is a lot of information on this slide. And you have a few blanks on this slide that you need to fill in. All right, so let's talk about the whole issue with run-on and fragments. With a run-on, typically, it's not punctuated correctly. So it's an easy fix. A lot of times, we can either make it 2 complete sentences, we can add a semicolon or a comma, or even just a colon to make it all work together. We can also add some words sometimes that will help us do that without punctuation. But let's specifically talk about subject-verb followed by subject-verb first. So you must use a period, a semicolon between, or a comma and a conjunction. Fanboys. Are y'all familiar with fanboys? No, it's not some ick factor that's stalking you on like Instagram or Twitter. Fanboys it's an acronym to help you remember some of the more common words that help you link, right? For, and, nor, but, or, yet, so. Fanboy. Right, so if you see any of those words, then you know you need a comma before it to link the sentence correctly. So let's look at some examples. The coal miners needed their jobs, period. They had also wanted to preserve their way of life, period. 2 complete sentences. Well, let's put it together. We don't want it to be 2 complete sentences. We want it to be 1 sentence. How do we do that? The coal miners needed their jobs, semicolon. They had also wanted to preserve their way of life. Perfectly acceptable. The coal miners needed their jobs, comma, but, one of our fanboys, they also had wanted to preserve their way of life. All 3 are in fact correct. At this point in time, it's kind of personal choice as to what you would use, but you have to be able to identify that those are in fact correct, and if they're punctuated incorrectly, which one of the ones B through D are in fact the correct way to make that statement. All right? Okay, let's look at this one. Subject, verb, followed by a conjunction verb. You don't need punctuation there. The subject carries the second verb because it's a compound or double predicate. Woo, lots of fancy language there. Let's look at the example. The students studied their PSATs and still had time to have fun. Oh, that's good news, right? Y'all having fun yet? All right, let's see if we can pump the volume a little bit here. So no punctuation is necessary there. Let's get into the real party scene right here. Complex sentences. All right, subordinate clause followed by a subject verb. Do use a comma between the 2 clauses. It's followed by, so it's subordinate followed by. That's really important. When it rains, I carry an umbrella. But if the subject verb is followed by the subordinate clause, you do not need a comma between the 2 clauses. I carry an umbrella when it rains. See the difference? It's kind of a natural flow as well. You hear the pause where you need the comma in the first one, and it flows all the way through in the second one. So more commas and more comma usage. So commas can be used in a list. They can separate a positives from a sentence. They offset non-essential clauses, and they can offset modifying clauses. So let's look at those examples. Please buy pens, needles, thread, and fabric at the store. All right, that's my list. And I do in fact need a comma after thread and before and for that, for the purposes of the test. The insect, a large cockroach, startled the girl in class. All right, I have to offset the large cockroach because it's describing the insect. The reporter who had covered stories about the hospital in the past asked many questions. So you see where those commas are really important for that sentence to be punctuated correctly. However, we do have essential clauses, clauses that have that in them. They don't need commas, so there should be no comma there. The school that was next to the highway held an auction every year. We don't need a comma, that works just fine. Dashes and parentheses can usually be replaced by a comma, but a comma cannot be replaced by dashes and parentheses, all right? And that's really more for non-essential clauses. I mean, you really wouldn't need it for an essential clause, but just so you know, you can't use dashes and parentheses to replace the comma, but you could use a comma to replace dashes and parentheses. Okay, leaving commas, whew, there's a lot of comma stuff there, and going into my favorite strategy. You can't tell me by it in this box, but I'm not very tall. All right, so my favorite strategy is this. Shorter answers are often correct. So shorter often is better. They avoid redundancy and wordiness. What that means is simply this. They are looking for that concise ability to write or to make a statement. So if you need 15 words to say something and I only need 8 to say the same thing, then they would prefer my 8 to your 15. So recognize when you could in fact say it with fewer words. And if you are trying to decide what the correct answer is, if there's one answer choice that has significantly fewer words or just one fewer word than the others, then look at that one first. Make sure it's punctuated correctly. Make sure that it does in fact not change the meaning of what you're saying. If it's punctuated correctly, it doesn't change the meaning of what you're saying, it's parallel, it hits all those markers you need to look for, then it probably is the correct answer. So here is a strategy. When there is a question along with the answer choice, pay close attention to the content of the question. When there's a question along with the answer choices, pay close attention to the content of the question. So let's look at this. Which choice connects the sentence to the previous paragraph? So there's a question in the question. When you see that, chances are you need to answer the question. You don't want to look for punctuation or flow here. You want to actually answer the question. That's more of that logic part, being able to find the data and analyze it. So that's not a punctuation or a flow issue, that's a can you actually answer the question issue. So when there's a question in the question. Word pairs. So these are kind of fun, right? These are all best friends. They don't ever go anywhere without the other one. But on the PSAT, sometimes they leave one of them behind. Frequently, they'll give you the first one and not the second one. If they give you both, then you need to look at both parts and check for parallel structure on either side of the second pair. So these pairs, not only but also prefer and to. Let's take a minute to talk about prefer and to. I prefer chocolate pudding more than vanilla pudding. Do any of y'all? Some of y'all are nodding your heads. Were any of y'all aware that the way I said that was in fact incorrect? Probably not. Maybe one or two of y'all. Good job, by the way. High five. But here's the thing. We say that all the time. Therefore, we don't really recognize when we say it and it's not correct. It should be this. I prefer chocolate pudding to vanilla pudding. So be really careful with prefer and to. Between and, neither nor, either or, both and, no sooner than. So again, they're always together. They never go anywhere without the other one. Just keep that in mind. So I talked about this slide a few slides ago. These are our know how to differentiate between the following and definition. Frequently confused words because they sound a lot alike, but they have very different meanings. There are a long list of these as they're all coming in. Affect and effect, that one gives me fits all the time. I always struggle with that one. I don't know why I can't keep that one straight. Let's look at between and among. How many of y'all know when to use between and when to use among? So between two, among many. Another one, precede, proceed, and proceeds. They all sound alike, but they're very, very different. I precede my sister in college applications because I'm 2 years older, so I come before my sister. Proceed, please proceed to the nearest exit at the end of this webinar. Not before you're dismissed though, please. So that is to go to, right? Completely different. And then there's proceeds. The proceeds of the benefit concert will go to the children's home. Has nothing to do with going anywhere or being first. It actually has to do with an item, generally money a lot of times. Another one, immigrant and immigrant. So an E and an I. So keep it straight this way. My friend immigrated from Brazil. She is an immigrant here in the United States. And fewer and less is another tricky one, and I'm going to go back to my elephants to help you remember fewer and less if you don't know fewer and less. If you do, then bear with me for a second. There are fewer elephants, therefore there is less dust. I can count the elephants, so if I can count it, that's when I use fewer. I can't count dust. I know there isn't as much dust, but I can't tell you how, like a number, like there's 3 dust particles less than there were before, so I'm going to use less. Fewer and less. Fewer elephants, less test. Final strategy for writing in language. Some questions have a yes or no answer corresponding to a reason on these questions. So a lot of times you're going to know, oh, I'm looking for a yes answer or I'm looking for a no answer. So you can quickly go ahead and line out whichever one you're not looking for. That's super easy. And then if you're not sure which one, is it yes, is it no? Because again, if it were just evident all the time, you probably wouldn't be sitting here listening to me right now. So then you have to go back and read the reasons, right? And if the reason doesn't correspond to the answer, or if the reason isn't supported by the passage, then you're going to eliminate that. And you can usually eliminate one or two that way. And then of the remaining two answers, you have to reread the reference and see which answer is best supported by the answer-reason combination. All right, a lot of words there. I'm gonna let you kind of work through that on your own for a second, make any little notes that you need to. Oh, big surprise. Participating moment. Are you ready? Whoop, practice. We're gonna do a practice writing in language section. It's in your supplement as well, so it's below the reading. You had 3 readings. So find your writing. It's writing 1. It's only 8 minutes though. That's great news. Getting better instead of worse. Everybody there? Again, be cognizant of your neighbor. If you finish early, then go ahead and score yourself from the answer in the back. Get ready and begin. Pencils down, time's up. Now that wasn't a bad 8 minutes, was it? And it was a great opportunity to kind of take all of that stuff that you just saw and figure out kind of how it really fits into real-time live testing. So let's talk about real-time live testing for a second. Go ahead and score as I'm talking if you haven't already done so. Again, you can find the answers just below where you found the reading answers. As you go forward, and remember today is all about preparation. This isn't the last time you'll prepare. You'll continue to prepare as you go along, but you want to move into practice mode. And as you're practicing for the PSAT or the SAT, you want to try and practice in an environment that as closely simulates actual test day as possible. So you don't want to practice with earbuds in and kind of texting in between. You really want to go in and focus on, okay, I have 8 minutes to do a writing test. So you want to set your timer for 8 minutes, and you want to be, that's how you are going to be taking the test in the real world. So how you practice should emulate how you will actually test. All right, everybody get their scores done? So, some good news. Y'all are actually going to take a break right now. So I'm going to let you go ahead and take a break. Your room monitor will let you know how long your break is and where you can and cannot go. So please be back in your seat at your end of break time, and we will get started on math. All right, welcome back. So good news. Good news is you just got a break. Even better news is we've already completed 2 of the 3 sections of this webinar. So math is our last section. Everybody should be good and awake right now, but once you get comfortable, try not to doze off on me again. Math is really, really, really important on the PSAT. The good thing about math is this. There are a lot of studies that have shown that by practicing math, you can improve your score more in the math area than in any other section. So some of y'all are like, oh, math, gosh, I wish I just didn't have to do math. And others of y'all are like, yay, finally math. So wherever it is that you fall on that scale, practice in math really does improve your math score long term. So there are some new terms regarding math with the PSAT. And the reason for that is, of course, because math is really focused on college and career readiness. PSAT and SAT are really focused on college and career readiness all the way through now, and there's a specific focus from types of math that are related to college and career readiness. There's also an emphasis on problem solving and data analysis, and that really ties into that career readiness, because problem solving and data analysis, those are real life math issues. And then that big thing about you have a section that you can use a calculator and you have a section that you can't use the calculator is totally new. And when you get to the non-calculator section, the purpose of that is to actually look at your problem-solving abilities. And the reality is this, a calculator does not make you smarter. A calculator makes you faster. And sometimes we use a calculator when our brain is in fact faster than the calculator is. So this really shouldn't be a daunting section for you at all, because it's not math that you're really going to benefit from having a calculator to begin with. So section 3 and 4 are both math sections. Remember, section 1 is reading, section 2 is writing and language, and then sections 3 and 4 are math. They are combined for a single math score. So section 3 is your non-calculator section. I know some of y'all are still a little stressed about that. We're only going to do the calculator section today, if that makes you feel any better. You have 17 questions. 13 of those are multiple choice, and then you have your 4 free response, which means you don't have answers to pick from. You just have to create your answer. Section 3 is 25 minutes total. Then you have section 4, and that's your calculator section that you can, in fact, use your calculator. If you're not sure if your calculator is legal or not, you can go to collegeboard.org, and it will let you know what acceptable calculators are on their website. There's 31 questions in section 4, 27 are multiple choice, and 4 are free response. Math section is 45 minutes total. That section 4 is 45 minutes. So you've got roughly 70 minutes of math total, but it's broken out into 2 sections, which is good. I can't imagine sitting still for math. My brain would hurt at the end of 70 full minutes of math. Math directions. So this is one of those things that if you haven't done some studying, you probably don't know. And that is that the formulas that you need to solve a lot of the geometry-related questions and other questions are included in the directions of the math section of the PSAT and the SAT. I can't tell you how many students are not aware of that, and so they have skipped answering questions in the past. They would have been perfectly capable of answering if they could have remembered the formula that they needed to answer the question. They didn't need to remember the formula, they just needed to have known that it was listed for them. But the good news is they've actually included a few more formulas for you. So they've given you formulas for volume of spheres, cones, and rectangular base pyramids. So that was something nice that they did. All numbers are real unless otherwise indicated on PSAT and SAT math. And figures are always drawn to scale unless it has this little tagline underneath it that will say figure not drawn to scale. So just a few things to keep in mind about math directions. Content. What does the content for math look like? Well, there are 3 phases, so to speak. You have the heart of algebra, problem solving and data analysis, and then passport to advanced math. Now that sounds really exciting and kind of exotic, doesn't it? I'm going to tell you, I don't want to disappoint you, but it's not terribly exciting or exotic. But we'll talk about why they use that term in just a minute. Tahiti is not on the menu though. So heart of algebra, is that like, oh, be still my beating heart because of algebra? Probably not. What the heart of algebra means is in the past and with the ACT still, you have to know a lot about a little, so to speak. So you have to know a lot of types of math, but you only need to know a very shallow amount of a lot. Here, with the heart of algebra, you need to know less, but more in depth. So it really kind of is getting to the heart of algebra. So you don't need to know as much. It's consolidated, but you need to know it at a deeper level than you've had to know in the past. They really want to see if you can analyze and solve equations and systems of equations. They're looking for your ability to create expressions. Equations and inequalities represent relationships between quantities and to solve problems. And then they also want to see if you can rearrange and interpret formulas. So that's what the heart of algebra is all about. Problem solving and data analysis. Okay, this is everyday kind of math for the most part. Can you create and analyze relationships using ratios, proportions, percentages, and units? Can you describe relationships shown graphically? So there's that graph aspect again. So we're going to have graphs through all 3 sections now. And then can you summarize qualitative and quantitative data? And these 2 words, those are 2 words that could show up on our frequently confused words slide for strategies in writing and language. Qualitative versus quantitative. They sound very similar, but they are similar in that they are measuring things. But one measures with numbers and one measures more with kind of your perception, so to speak. So let's look at that. Let's take a cup of latte. So if I were going to give you a qualitative summary of my latte, I would say that, oh, my latte, it's got this fabulous, robust aroma. It's really frothy, and it's wonderfully strong, and I drink it in a burgundy cup. But Jason over here could come in and say, that cup's not burgundy, that cup is red. And you call that strong? That is weak. And frothy, that's creamy, that's not frothy. And I would say it kind of is a weak in smell, certainly not robust. Well, okay, that's what Jason thinks. Not what I think, but that's what Jason thinks. So that's qualitative. But quantitative, my latte is 12 ounces of latte. It's 150 degrees serving temperature. It's being served to me in a cup that is 7 inches in height, and I paid $4.95 for it. Jason can't really come in and argue those facts because I have numbers supporting that. That's quantitative. So the difference between qualitative and quantitative. Most of y'all probably already have that, but it might help you keep it straight when you're a little stressed and not thinking straight sometimes. Think about a latte. It smells kind of good. All right, passport to advanced math. So is this where we jump off and go to Tahiti? I know we're all wishing that we could jump off and go to Tahiti right now, but it in fact is not. With the passport to advanced math, that's in fact 28% of the types of math you will see on the test, is this. They have identified 16 questions between the 2 sections, section 3 and section 4, and these 16 questions cover topics that have great relevance to college and career work. So they've identified these 16 questions as a really good indicator of college and career necessary math. They need you to rewrite expressions using their structure, create, analyze, and solve quadratic and higher order equations, and manipulate polynomials purposefully to solve problems. Let me just do that again. Manipulate polynomials purposefully to solve problems. There are a lot of P's in that sentence. So as fascinating as that was, it doesn't quite live up to the Tahiti expectation. Then we have additional math topics, 10% of what you're going to see. These are your area and volume calculations, investigating lines, angles, triangles, circles, theorems. It's your geometry and your trigonometry. This slide right here, I just figured, since we keep talking about these graphs, probably should be able to see a pretty graph, a colorful graph in math. And this is just your pie chart for how it looks. So as you can see, passport to advanced math, problem solving, data analysis, and the heart of algebra, they all are about equal in what you see, and then you've got that little sliver of geometry and trigonometry as well. Okay, so we've kind of seen the overview of math. Let's jump into our general strategies for approaching the math that we're going to see on the PSAT and the SAT. So the primary approach is you can solve directly. What is the slope of a line that passes through the points 5, 3, and 2, and 4? You're directly solving that. That's your approach. Or you can approach the solving of that problem indirectly. You can utilize the answer choices that have been supplied. You could work backwards. You can make a simpler version, or you could make up your own numbers. Obviously you can't make up your own numbers if they've given you the numbers, but if they've given you variables, it's highly beneficial at times for you to drop numbers in for those variables, and it becomes much easier to work that problem. Okay. If you haven't retweeted anything before now, then I hope you'll retweet the middle way. This is a great tip. This and the bracket tip are my two favorite tips within the whole presentation. The middle way, remember we talked about that indirect approach and to use your answer selections. That's exactly what this is. So if you're going to use your answers, start in the middle. Notice that your answer choices increase from A to D. They will always generally increase, or at the very worst, they'll decrease, but they will always be sequential and least to greatest or greatest to least. So what you do is you take the middle, in this case it's C, and it's even better now because you only have 4 answer choices instead of the 5 that we had in the past. So you take C and you plug it in to see if that number is correct. So what this problem is saying is there were 200 tickets that were sold for a concert. Some of the tickets were $10, some of them were $5. Total ticket sales were $17.50, and they want to know how many more of the $10 tickets were sold than the $5 tickets. So we just take that 100, we multiply it by times 10, the $10 tickets. That gives us 1,000. Then we multiply it times the 5, which gives us 500 for a total of 1,500 in ticket sales. So we know that the answer is D, right? Because C is too small, and B and A are even smaller than C, so our answer has to be D. Makes it really quick and easy. So again, go ahead and retweet that. I know y'all are on your phone, so you might as well do something PSAT oriented with it. And if you haven't downloaded the SAT of the Day app, then go ahead and do that too. I know it sounds kind of nerdy, but it will actually help you long term. All right, that second indirect approach, make up your own numbers. All right, so complicated problems can be made simple if you try to understand them numerically instead of abstractly. So if you tell me to solve for n, I'm like, n, what is n? But if I can put a number in place of n, then all of a sudden it comes to life a little bit better. So I have Saul, and he works at a local athletic store, and his store has a sale on everything in the store, and it's discounted 30% off the original price. Well, because he works there, he also gets an employee discount of 10%. So we need to know what represents how much Saul will pay for clothing items that would sell for N dollars at their original price. Now keep in mind, Saul is only going to pay 70% of the total value because of the 30% sale that they have. But then he's only going to pay 90% of the 70% because he's got that additional 10% off. So we would set it up at he's paying 90% of 70% of N. That's kind of tough to figure out. But if I say 9.9 times 0.7, that in fact gives me 63N. And look at that, ta-da, there is my answer choice, D. So we put numbers in place of, and it made it much easier to solve. So that's our second indirect approach. Look at it, you know it, it's right there on the tip of your tongue. Oh, it's there, it's there. It's work backwards. Yep, I know, right? So obvious. How could you have not seen that? It took me a while, trust me. But I won't ever miss it again. And this is, we talked about that as well. It's an indirect approach. And sometimes the last piece of information that you receive is the most useful piece of information. So you can work backwards. And what we have here is one of those word problems we all know and love. And we have somebody that's making a dog run for his dog. We know that the length of the run is 5 less than 3 times the width. We need to know how many feet of fence does Tonks use if the area of the dog run is 197 square feet. All right, so we have that information and we basically just need to work backwards to figure out how many feet of fence he needs to do it. And it's much easier to use it working backwards because we know about 1,197 square feet. That was really important, so it helps us figure it out. So it would have been hard to do with just knowing that it was 5 less, 3 times the width. So working backwards can be very beneficial. Computational tricks. PEMDAS. Dear Aunt Sally. Oh, we all know and love Dear Aunt Sally, right? Isn't it amazing that we all have a Dear Aunt Sally? Most of us anyway. If you didn't have a Dear Aunt Sally, then you may have just learned PEMDAS. So all it is it's telling you to do parentheses, then all your exponents, your logs and your roots, then multiplication and division, and then addition and subtraction. So we are going to recommend that you take it, we're going to kind of ramp up Aunt Sally, so to speak. So because multiplication and division are on the same order, you can make your numbers smaller by dividing before you multiply. You can also take your subtraction and change it to addition so you can add in workable pairs. So it looks like this. Perform your division before your multiplication. So when we first look at this, we're like, what is 1/2 of 3? We don't need to know what 1/2 of 3 is because we know that 1/2 of 50 is 25. Well, there we go. 25 times 3, 75. It's much easier than trying to figure out what 1/2 of 3 is. Let's look at subtraction and addition. So we have this, and what we've done here is we've just kind of grouped everything a little bit differently so that we have our negatives and our positives. Now, I will tell you that this is one way to work the problem. You may have a completely different way to work this problem, and that's fine as long as what you come up with is 48. It doesn't really matter how you do it, but if you weren't sure how to approach this problem, then this is one way that you could go ahead and tackle that problem. So fractions. Remember to cross multiply when a fraction is equal to either a fraction or a number. All right, so we have this 2n over 25 is equal to 10. And in essence, what we're really saying there fractionally is 10 over 1. So then we can go in and we can do our cross multiplication and we end up with what? 2n times 1 equals 25 times 10. All right? Then you can also just do the straight dividing across. And so what we did here was we had the 12a squared over 8b divided by 3a over 4b, which we do our division, comes up to 4a over 2, which ultimately ends up being 2a. Fractions, simplifying fractions, and cross-cancel before you multiply. So let's look at this. We have 15x over 30 times 12 over 7x squared. So we know that 15 will go into 30, right? So that gives us 1x over 2. And then we multiply that by 12 over 7x squared, which then gives us what? We're going to cancel out. What can we cancel out further? Right? Now we can go and cross out our x's. And so it ends up being 6 over 7x. Perfect. Numerators can be divided, and then the denominator's denominator can be divided to the numerator. It's kind of fun to say. Makes me feel like an announcer instead of a Michelle in a box. So with that, we have a over a to the 4th equals, then we put numbers in there, right? So we have 1 over 1 to the 4th. Well, if we cross out, guess what happens? 4. Now, if only the PSAT math were as simple as our examples are, we make our examples simple so that you can actually see the rules, so to speak. Unfortunately, it's not going to be quite that easy, but you won't have any problem because you will have practiced and prepared to succeed on the PSAT with all of this information. All right, Let's look at percent and scientific notation. So let's look at percent first. When trying to find how much you pay from a percent discount, multiply by 100 minus P, P being 4%. So let's look at it this way. How does Stuart pay if he gets a 20%, or how much I should say? We don't know how Stuart pays. Cash, check, credit card, or maybe it's Apple Pay at this point in time. How much does Stuart pay if he gets a 20% discount on a $93 purchase? 80%, right? We just want to say, what is 80% of 93? Because a 20% discount is in fact 80% of the whole. So we would say 0.8 times 93 equals 7.4. On to scientific notation. Woohoo, we are having so much fun. Here we go. Scientific notation can be computed by parts. So let's look at multiplication. So we have all of these numbers and their number powers, right? Or their letter powers, I should say. So when we plug those numbers in, and we have 5 times 10 to the third times 4 times 10 to the fifth equals 20 times 10 to the eighth. Now what's wrong with that? Remember, in scientific notation, the first number always has to be between 1 and 10. Is 20 between 1 and 10? It isn't. So what we have to do is we have to make 22, and when we do that, that makes 10 go to the 9th power instead of the 8th power. So that's the thing that you have to remember for scientific notation, if you don't already know to remember it, is that the first number has to be between 1 and 10. If we look at division, then there we are with our numbers and their letter power, our letters and their letter power. And then we plug in real numbers and we do our division. But we were good here because our first number was in fact between 1 and 10. All right, here comes a really big busy slide, sort of. Has a really big word in it. Unit analysis, dimensional analysis, and stoichiometry. It only took me like 15 times of practicing that to actually get it right. And I'm still not sure I have my enunciations in the right place, so giggle and carry on, so to speak. Pay attention to units as they can cancel when divided by each other. So here's the strategy. You want to set up a conversion problem by multiplying a series of fractions based upon the analysis of the units, because we need to pay attention to when those units cancel each other out. So one of our other love 'em or leave 'em word problems is, how many liters of fuel will a jumbo jet use during a 2,332-mile flight from New York to Seattle? If its average speed is 550 miles per hour and it uses 4 liters of fuel per second. So how are we going to set that up? It's going to look like this. All right, and then we need to go through and see what we can cancel out from a unit perspective. So we can cancel hours, we can cancel minutes, and we can cancel seconds, which leaves us with 232 times 60 times 60 times 4 liters divided by 550. All right? All right. Trigonometry. So trig is not really so bad when it comes to PSAT and SAT. First of all, there's not going to be all that many questions. Remember, it's only about 10%, and it's not all 10% of it is trig. How many of y'all already kind of know a way to keep the SOHCAHTOA straight? Great. I'm sure a lot of y'all have learned about the hippie. A few of y'all know about the Indian chief SOHCAHTOA. Or you can just kind of memorize this visual right here, where you have a big S and then O over H, the big C, A over H, and the big T, and O over A. So why do we have O over H and A over H? Because that tells you how to set the problem up. So if you have to solve for sine, then you know that it's opposite divided by hypotenuse. If you have to solve for cosine, it's adjacent divided by hypotenuse. And if you have to solve for tangent, then it's opposite divided by adjacent. That little toothpick with the olive in it looking symbol, the theta symbol, that symbol is your indicator for where your opposite is and where your adjacent is. Because remember, our hypotenuse, it never moves. It is, in fact, always the hypotenuse. So the theta will tell you your O and your A, but then by remembering the SOHCAHTOA, you remember how to set those up to solve for them. So pretty simple. I mean, it really is kind of that straightforward for trigonometry on the PSAT. Good news. Yay. Little happy place. quadratics. So ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. So we solve we solve quadratic equations by factoring, completing the square, and the quadratic formula. So how many of y'all have already memorized the quadratic formula? Okay, right? And then some of y'all are like, no. So if you have, great. If you haven't, try. Sometimes it just won't stick. But if you're practicing a lot, you're probably going to memorize it by nature of working in it so much. The real thing that you need to remember about the quadratic formula is the important information is under the square root, right? It's going to tell you how many solutions you have, the number of your solutions. So that's the important part of that quadratic formula. Not to say that the other pieces aren't important, but that's your really key indicator right there, what's under the square root. So moving on from quadratics into factoring. We're not really moving on into quadratics, we're moving into quadratics with factoring, so to speak. So here we are, we have if n times 3x minus 2 times x minus 4 is 0, and x is less than 0, what is the value of n? What is the value of n? Thinking. Okay, let me help you think. So either the n, the 3x minus 4, or the x minus 4, if either of the later two are 0, then x would be greater than 0. And that is in fact a contradiction to what that is saying, because we know that x is less than 0. Therefore, the n, because x is in fact less than 0, can only be 0. So the answer here is B. Here's another one. And the whole reason that we even put these up here is for y'all to remember how important 0 is when you're factoring a quadratic. All right? Know your exponent laws. So I wish that I did have a really cute little acronym or a way of illustrating it like SOHCAHTOA to help you keep those straight. But you just kind of have to know your exponent laws, and you really do need to be familiar with your exponent laws because you will use a lot of exponents on PSAT and SAT math. And remember that fractional exponents are really just roots. Okay, you have that right there. So if you're not sure, if you're like, oh, I have forgotten that, then go ahead and circle that one so you can kind of recommit it to memory, so to speak. Here's one of those slides that has a lot to say, and I'm going to let you read it for yourself. The thing that you want to take from this slide, understand the function of each component of a function. But what I really want you to take from this slide is that you have to be fluent. You have to be fluent in working from both x and function values on algebraic expression, tables of values, and graphs for PSAT and SAT math. So that's really what you're taking from this slide. Kind of look at that. So here's our little sample. All right, we have that little kind of, I don't even really know what that looks like. It looks like a J that has a funny tail, maybe, I don't know. So the function f times x equals x7 times 2x4 minus 3 is graphed in the xy plane above. If negative x is equal to k has two real solutions for some constant k, which of the following represents all possible values of k? The answer is D. Why isn't the answer A? Because f in this particular problem is negative. If it hadn't been negative, if it had just been f, then the answer would have been A. So again, be fluent. Okay, let's take that fluency into a math section quiz. It's going to be 15 minutes. We're going to do math test 1 with calculator. So go ahead and find that. You may use your cell phone if you didn't bring a calculator today. Remember, your cell phone cannot go into a PSAT or an SAT, but you can use it for today. If you finish before the 15 minutes, then go ahead and score on your own. Everybody there? And begin.